All right, hello everyone again. This is Mike Mazzarese with AST Environmental. I'll be the MC for today's presentation. I'll introduce the speakers here in a minute. Just a couple notes. This webinar is being recorded, so if you do have to jump off early or if you'd like to share it with a colleague, this will be posted to the AST webinar page on our website within the next few days. And lastly, just like any webinar, use the Q&A down there at the bottom to submit questions. I'll be monitoring those. And this is going to run about 45 minutes. And so that'll leave us about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Dwayne Guilfoyle will be presenting some of the content today. He's the president with AST Environmental. And our guest speaker today is Ray Vaske, Senior Remediation Engineer with Trihydro Corporation, and they're going to speak to us about a very interesting project that is located in Linden, New Jersey. Ray, I will hand it off to you.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you for having me. I appreciate everybody coming today. The topic, CAT 100, reductive dechlorination with concurrent sequestration of PFAS and 1,4-dioxane at a former manufacturing facility. Long title. CAT 100 alternative title is on the prowl and seeking VOCs, PFAS, and 1,4-dioxane in New Jersey. So on with the acknowledgments. Thank you to AST for all the investigation work as well as doing the remediation work at the site. Thank you to RPI, Scott Nolan, President, Trihydro's Allison Riffle, Brian Martinek, Katie Mitchell, Tyler Beal, Summit Drilling, Talon Drilling, EPI, and then our laboratories, Eurofins, Microbial Insights, and Microbac. Also, thank you to our client, confidential client, that was integral in being able to conduct this work. The disposition of the site is that it was an 80,000 square foot building, is an 80,000 square foot building. And underneath the building, which was recently purchased, was a 45,000 square foot of underlying contaminated soil and groundwater, including VOCs, PFAS, and 1,4-dioxane, and over 100 milligram per liter of TCE in the overburden groundwater. So our objectives at this site, given the accelerated time frame, should state ahead of time that the building was going to be renovated and retrofitted for the new business, and we were operating under a permit by rule through New Jersey in order to conduct some expedited remediation through an interim action. So our objectives at the site were to target and reduce quickly TCE and overburden saturated zone within a 1,000 microgram per liter contour, and to reduce PFAS and overburden saturated zone within a 1 microgram per liter isocontour. So the processes that we are relying on at the site were sequestration of chlorinated VOCs, PFAS, and 1,4-dioxane, and abiotic and biotic reductive dechlorination of high concentrations of chlorinated ethenes. So the planning phase, we obtained quotes for different technologies for the remedy. We looked at CAT 100, iron impregnated granule activated carbon, trap and treat technology. Vendor A was a powdered granular activated carbon, and the vendor B was emulsified vegetable oil and zero valent iron. We went along with the CAT 100 because it was the only product that was capable of addressing VOCs, PFAS, and 1,4-dioxane. So a little bit about CAT 100, combination of metallic iron impregnated carbon and degradable organic substrates, yeast extract, vitamin B12, that synergistically catalyze reductive dechlorination of chlorinated VOCs, including PC, TC, and associated daughter compounds. In an anaerobic setting, the fused iron and carbon are believed to facilitate the transfer of electrons produced when substrates are fermented under biogeochemically favorable conditions. Proposed mechanisms at the site as mentioned earlier, or sequestration of VOCs, abiotic reduction of fluorinated VOCs, and bioaugmentation with the microbial community enhanced with a proprietary blend of bacteria. Indigenous populations of Dechlorination McCartyi and other beneficial aerobic bacteria were previously confirmed and not added. It's a complex combination of anaerobic biodegradation, co-metabolic oxidation, and potentially microbially mediated reduction by iron-bearing minerals. Again, the expedited action, the building was under aggressive renovation in the area you see in yellow. Active operations were occurring throughout the work in the areas in green. Interim characterization of remediation of VOCs was conducted by AST shortly after the facility was purchased. And again, the remediation was conducted under a permit by rule, which is basically the same words as an underground injection permit. So the site hydrogeology is a Pleistocene glacial deposit directly overlying a Triassic siltstone and shale bedrock of the Brunswick Formation. The glacial sediment at the site is mapped as primarily unstratified glacial till, ground moraine consisting of unlayered debris deposited directly beneath the glacier, but some stratified drift. The ground moraine deposits or till are typically very similar in composition to the underlying bedrock material, and is composed mainly of silt and clay mixed with some sand and gravel. So the depth to groundwater, the depth to bedrock is approximately 30 feet. Depth to groundwater, 5 to 10 feet. The saturated till, 5 to 15 feet, and then intermediate groundwater at 15 to 35 feet. Low permeability siltstone shale bedrock. Very low flow rate through the site with a low hydraulic gradient. Inferred flow of the groundwater in the shallow zone is all over the place, as you can see here. And this is largely because there are many utilities around the site. Much of it is paved. So depends on what time of year you go out as well, but generally in many different directions, hard to make sense of that. A consistent flow direction in the east-southeast across most of the site in the lower till. So these are the baseline groundwater chemistry, the criteria that we use to develop an injection program. Low DO, kind of a mixed range of ORP values, pH near neutral, little to no organic carbon to drive bio. Low levels of magnetically susceptible materials, which we're looking for to see if there was any natural abiotic reduction potential. Sulfate levels from 22 to 620 milligrams per liter gives us some idea of how much material will be toward sulfate reduction versus the targeted reduction of CVOCs. And the Dechlorination McCartyi with functional genes were detected at low concentrations or low census in the shallow zone. But when I say deep bedrock here, 10 to the 4th cells per mil is of the VCR functional genes, and this is at 200 feet below the ground surface. So we have some oxidizing enzymes present as well, sulfate-reducing bacteria. And then I'm going to let Dwayne take over to tell you all about the awesome characterization work they did.
Thanks, Ray. So the first step to the deployment of the CAT 100 technology involved the completion of remedial design characterization. The goal of the remedial design characterization was to define the speciated total mass and how it's distributed in the formation. This ultimately provides a roadmap to successful remediation and optimization of the cost. So during the planning stages for the remedial design characterization, Trihydro and AST performed a data gap analysis, which Ray really has gone into, the specifics of some of that, the geology, groundwater levels, flow directions, concentrations, and then prior remedial efforts. But the results of the data gap analysis define the scope for the remedial design characterization that included, completion of closely spaced continuous soil borings with the goal of obtaining a robust set of soil samples targeting predominantly the saturated soils. Discrete groundwater samples were also, targeted to define, the extent of the impacts in the shallow and intermediate groundwater. And then Remediation Products Incorporated, the manufacturers of the CAT 100, provide analytical support in their laboratory in Golden, Colorado, where they run pro bono analysis for the soil samples and the groundwater samples collected as part of the RDC. The results of that RDC are used to develop a 3D model that ultimately provides a quantitative conceptual site model of where that contaminant mass resides. So some specifics related to the work done at the Linden site. So in the shallow overburden from 0 to 25 feet, we installed 69 soil borings spaced 35 feet apart, 623 soil samples collected. And then at each of those soil boring locations, we put a nested micro well cluster in with screens from 5 to 15 and 15 to 25 feet. And then we also collected groundwater samples from the monitoring wells, also running microbial analysis as a part of that. Because of the shallow refusal that we encountered when using the 77 size geoprobe at 25 feet, we brought out a sonic rig to basically get access to that zone of the weathered bedrock, which we were calling the Passaic Gap, which is the zone from the 25 to 40 feet at this site, 40 feet being the competent bedrock. And we installed 6 borings where we were collecting soil samples and rock samples and then groundwater samples from within that unit to get a better handle of the total mass present. We also brought out a 3230 geoprobe just to do soundings to see if we could get deeper than the 77 probe could achieve, and we were able to get to 32 feet versus the 25, which that gave us an indication of what we would be using for the overall injection itself. Go ahead, Ray. So as a part of, we won't get into a lot of the detail on this, but the bedrock is something that we'll be looking at in the future. But we did do some bedrock discrete sampling just to get a handle of the contaminant mass residing within the southwest corner of the property. We put 3 bedrock clusters in with open boreholes from 40 to 65 feet and 60 to 90. We did do an NQ core with 44 rock samples collected. And then we did downhole geophysics caliper, optical televiewer downhole camera, and then came back in with a discrete sample packer that you can see there on the left-hand side where we can actually isolate 18-inch intervals of the formation to get groundwater samples from fractures or features that were identified as part of the downhole camera work. Go ahead, Ray. So, like I said, all of those samples that are collected, of those 650 plus samples, are put into a 3D model that we use from our partners in Denmark. Developed this model, and ultimately it helps us, guide the overall design process and the loadings for each of the areas to target the mass that's present. So as you can see here, these are heat maps for the TCE concentrations in the soil, where we broke up the shallow and the deep zone from 0 to 15 and 15 to 30. Go ahead, Ray. And then this is the actual groundwater concentrations within those units from 5 to 15 and 15 to 25. And it helps guide, like I said, gives us an indication of where we want to target, but that gives you an indication of how the contaminant mass is migrating. You can see it kind of overlays on top of each other, the 5 to 15, 15 to 20, but on the 15 to 20, there was a migration to the northwest. Go ahead, Ray. And then this early on, we knew that a lot of the bedrock wells that have been set out there, they did have what wells that were installed in that kind of crossed over from the glacial till and into the weathered bedrock from the 15 to 35-foot zone. And that's where a lot of our high groundwater concentrations that we were seeing, specifically at MW7, where you can see there at 115 basically part per million to TCE, which, you know, gave us an indication that was predominantly where the source area was. And then, you know, also some higher concentrations to the south and to the east and to the north. So that was pretty much what we knew at the time. But then we came back in and did the, you know, using the sonic to gain access to that unit to grab more groundwater data. And basically that this became the footprint of the intermediate groundwater zone and ultimately was the target of the overall remediation itself. Go ahead, Ray. These are cross sections that are cut. The top two are from south to north. Basically, you know, give you an indication of where source mass resides, you know, 13 ppm, 179 ppm TCE in the soil. And it helps us isolate, you know, when I talk about the design in a minute, where we break the site down into each individual area based on the borings. These cross sections also have strip logs on them where we can actually look at those concentrations spatially. And, you know, depending on what the client may be interested in looking at, we can cut cross sections at any zone across the site. The conceptual site model for the bedrock, you know, like I said, you know, just to point out a few highlights about the NQ core, you know, we actually found mass within the actual bedrock itself as much as 1.1 ppm of TCE at 45 feet and 46 feet in the formation, but also some, you know, low-level hits that were still down as far as 60, 65 feet that are going to continue to be contribution to the groundwater impacts in the groundwater. This is the results of discrete sampling where we're going in with the stratopacker and really just predominantly look at the table on the right-hand side, and you could see that TCE concentrations at you know, depth within the bedrock itself, some really high concentrations, pretty good indication of possible DNAPL in the competent bedrock from 41 to 65 feet, and then it actually reduces in concentrations as you get deeper. So from all of that sampling effort, we break the site down into these individual areas that you can see from the black rectangles and shapes there. And what we're trying to do is use the data from each of the RDC points to actually make sure that we're putting the proper loading of the product to match the contaminant mass at each of the horizons. So the overall CAT 100 injection plan for the site was direct push injections of the CAT 100 from approximately around 8 feet down to 32 feet over the 38,000 square foot area. There was 873 points and injection points planned with 8,286 injection intervals completed at every 2 vertical feet at each injection point. So a total CAT 100 of 179,185 pounds with 105 days to complete the effort. Then to get after and inject the product within that weathered portion of the bedrock where we saw a lot of high concentrations, we had shallow refusal with the 32 at 32 feet with the 3230. So we came back in with the sonic rig and implemented the geotap injections on a approximately 25-foot grid pattern at 20 injection locations with injections completed every 2 vertical feet, starting at 33 feet and going to 39 feet. So 19,000 pounds of material installed within that weathered portion of bedrock over a 7-day period of time. Go ahead, Ray. So again, the quantities, just to summarize, approximately 200,000 pounds of Cat 100, including 110,000 pounds of Boss 200, 77,000 pounds of cornstarch, 9,000 pounds of beef fiber, and 1,900 pounds of yeast extract, plus 225 gallons of bacteria. Again, the slurry was injected on 2-foot vertical intervals in the overburden injections, using our overburden equipment, which I'll get into in a minute. We were injecting at flow rates of around 35 gallons per minute. And then in the deeper unit where we are injecting in the geotap points, we actually injected the slurries at as high as 110 gallons per minute. Go ahead, Ray. So moving into the overall implementation, there was a lot of logistical challenges at this site. We had an old cafeteria area that had 9-foot ceilings, some production areas at 11-foot, and then we had a lot of traffic and overhead utilities in the parking lot area to the west of the site. So, as Ray had indicated, this was a pretty dynamic process because, the construction for the facility was ongoing. They were remodeling the facility at the same time that we were doing the work. And so we were pushed to get out of areas as quick as possible so they could move right in behind us with the renovations itself. Ray pointed out there was a underground utility that we had encountered and that was always, at most of these sites of historical, we do utility locates the best we can. And, we did encounter a sewer line that was not planned. So when we apply these products, they're applied as a slurry. We are using surgical injections with high energy in order to emplace the material in the glacial till material. We use a tight grid spacing, and the reason for that is to control where the injection fluid is going to make sure we're getting the product that's planned at the horizon of where to match the contaminant mass that's identified during the remedial design process. The injection crews have to be, always making changes based on injection volumes and tips and overall exit velocities in order to get the best distribution. And a lot of that is just field interpretations when they're out there based on the responses they're seeing from the formation. We're always pushing for top-down injections. We believe that's the only way to assure that you're getting the product at the right locations. Back to a little bit about the geotap that I spoke about earlier, and we've talked about this in the last presentation on this series that we're talking about is, at this site, again, we hit shallow refusal with a 3230 at 32 feet. We had to get into the unit that was weathered sitting on top of the competent bedrock at 40. So we pre-drill with sonic in order to get into that unit. We use engineered backfilled bentonite to build a solid core of bentonite to the surface. And then we came back in and actually pushed back through the bentonite with a 3230 to complete the injections and get the product installed within that weathered unit. Go ahead, Ray. So this site, again, we used about every rig known that GeoProbe manufactures, from a dolly rig, as you can see here, where we were accessing hallways and the shallow ceiling areas of the cafeteria. Go ahead, Ray. Keep going to the next slide.
Sure.
And so during the overburden injections, we use our overburden injection trailers that have the capability of between 2 and 70 GPM at this site. Like I said, on average, we were running in around 35 gallon per minute in the shallow unit down to the 32-foot depth. The triplex pump is something that we use for bedrock, but we also use that at this site for the geotap injections, where this pump has the capability of running between 88 and 250 gallons per minute at a maximum pressure of 2,500 psi. I had indicated earlier we were injecting at the site into that weathered unit as high as the 110 gallons per minute in order to achieve the distribution of material in that weathered rock. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ray and let him talk about the overall results from the site.
Thanks, Wayne. So there are a lot of different ways to measure the performance of a remedy like this for chlorinated ethenes. And one of the ways is to use a chlorine number. And that's using the molar concentrations of each one of the chlorinated ethenes, and then include ethane and ethane as 0 chlorines. And as you see, we would tally these up so that you get the total chlorinated ethenes, total moles of chlorinated ethenes. And then we come up with a chlorine number from, sorry about that, from 1 chlorine for vinyl chloride, 2 for dichloroethene, 3 for trichloroethene, and 4 for PCE. And then we'll use those in order to develop a graphical interpretation of the extent of reductive dechlorination at a site. So you come up with a number. This is a good way to take a look at the whole package at once instead of just looking at TCE, cis, DCE, vinyl chloride, and chlorinated ethenes individually. That's a lot of different figures to look at, or total VOCs. In this way, you can see in a snapshot way a number as to the total amount of dechlorination that has occurred, that is reduction in chlorine. The caveat to this approach is that it's useful primarily where the initial concentration of parent compounds is high before remediation. That is where large changes can be observed after remediation. It's less applicable where, for example, 1 microgram per liter of PCE, if that's all you had at a monitoring location, would be a chlorine number of 4, which would sound like one of the less desirable situations. But obviously 1 microgram per liter would be equaling a cleanup goal. So that wouldn't be a problem. And then conversely, if you had a chlorine number of 1, it would indicate that you had only vinyl chloride present, but you could have vinyl chloride at 10,000 micrograms per liter, which would be misleading regarding the amount of reductive dechlorination to go. So this is a way of seeing this again. These are all the wells that we collected samples at the site. The control well that you see at the top is a well that was not within the reach of the remedy. So the first point you see here is before the remedy was implemented. And then you can see over a 6-month injection program that the chlorine number decreases significantly. We have a reduction from a chlorine number of 2.4, which if you look up here, mild reductive dechlorination, that means we're into the TCE to cis DCE range, to all the way down to 0.6 in this case by April 2024. This is a significant reduction. We're now into nearly complete reductive dechlorination. Intermediate groundwater results, again, these are this one data point that you see that comes up here was a well that was outside the influence of the injection program. The rest of these wells are within that, the reach of the injection work. And again, decreased from 2.8 to 0.7. Average TCE decreased from 15 micrograms per liter to 6.6 micrograms per liter. It's a significant improvement. This is the same data, only presented graphically. So you can see a chlorine number that goes from before, here's May 2023. And if you follow the arrows, you can see green is clean. That's what we're shooting for towards ethene and ethane. And we've reduced most of our TCE to just ethene and vinyl chloride. This is a nice animation that AST put together to show TCE, particularly in the shallow zone. So this is interesting because we're installing wells at the same time as we're doing the injection work. And so you'll see some pops like this over here. This is just a new data point where we started to collect data because these wells were installed during the injection work. But you can see it's very dynamic, and you can see that it continues to be reduced over here at the chart. You know, we're looking to get down to non-detects for TCE. And in large part, by the time we got to 11 months, we had reduced the TCE to non-detect levels in most of the monitoring wells. So this is the intermediate groundwater, same thing for chlorine number. This is a before where you see 4 as would be PCE, and then those color gradients to TC, cis 1,2-DC. This includes the isomers of 1,1-DCE and trans DCE as well. And then all the way to ethene and ethene. So you can see the progression goes down until we're almost entirely into the range of ethene, ethane to vinyl chloride. Another graphic for the intermediate groundwater. So again, there's a couple of pops in here where a monitoring well will have been installed, and it's fresh data that occurs. But the decreases are significant, and most of the TCE was reduced over the first 11 months. So, and that 11 months includes the 6-month injection period. So these are significantly reductions in a very short period of time. So to look at the conventional graph of the reduction of TCE to cis and vinyl chloride and ethene in low concentration wells, medium concentration wells, and high concentration wells. We're starting with the shallow groundwater. This is, a low starting concentration for TCE that's quickly degraded. You can see by the time you get to the injection interval right here, as the TCE is degraded, you get an increase in cis 1,2-DCE. The cis 1,2-DC comes down, and you're seeing vinyl chloride being produced. This is like a classic biological reductive dechlorination. And then the dominant green is clean is ethene at the top here. So mostly ethene at the conclusion in a low concentration well. This is actually slightly outside the area where we applied the amendments as well. So sulfate reducing conditions are ongoing. Organic carbon has decreased. Again, it wasn't directly in the area of injection. So this is a look at intermediate groundwater at kind of moderate level concentrations, ppm VOCs. This shows you a track of TCE and cis 1,2-DC. Again, cis comes down, but TCE comes down, and we have an increase in cis, and some buildup of cis over time. And then ethene and ethane dominate under sulfate reducing conditions at the site. So ORPs are in the -250 to -350 range. So intermediate groundwater, ppm VOCs reduced to ppb VOCs. So we have 3 orders of magnitude reduction in TCE, an order of magnitude reduction in cis. We have vinyl chloride increase and then decrease to within the same order of magnitude. And then ethene and ethane dominate under sulfate reducing conditions. So now we have should mention that methane was present at around 20 milligrams per liter. So we're pushing up towards the solubility limit of methane in the groundwater, which is potentially beneficial for co-metabolic oxidation of the VOCs that are remaining. So intermediate groundwater, source area only. This is the highest concentration well at the site. So it's 100 milligrams per liter or higher. And as you can see, it got knocked out of the ballpark. It was reduced significantly immediately at a little pop and came down again. And vinyl chloride. These are the log scale, should note that too. So these are significant reductions over the last 7 months. And then ethene and ethane, continue to increase in concentration, 6.4 milligrams per liter of ethene. It is the most abundant of chlorinated ethenes and ethane and ethene. It's not shown in this graph just for clarity, but there is plenty of organic carbon remaining, that is tens to hundreds of milligrams per liter from the starch and pea fiber that AST injected. So we've been talking this whole time about the chlorinated ethenes at the site. However, remember that one of our goals was to also reduce PFAS and 1,4-dioxane. So we didn't have, a prescription when we went in to do this work. How much do you add, particularly when you have high concentrations of PFAS and chlorinated ethenes, to exactly reduce our targets to a particular level? But this is great data to show that we were able to get a 50% reduction in general in PFAS species, while we were doing this work. Similarly for 1,4-dioxane, we can see that we have a significant reduction on average from 21 micrograms per liter to 13 micrograms per liter over the 11-month period. So the chemistry at the end of 14 months is DO levels continue to be low, negative ORP levels, pH values great, no pH crash, bacteria are in a favorable range. Organic carbon is present in most groundwater samples greater than 20 milligrams per liter. Sulfate levels low. We have methane present to support co-metabolism or catabolism of chlorinated ethenes. We have 10 to the 4th cells per mil of Dechlorination McCartyi. That's a 1,000-fold increase in shallow and intermediate groundwater. And then we have other species of bacteria that we detected at 10 to the 3rd cells per mil, and these are generally helper species. These all degrade TCE, just not all the way through ethene. So the CAT 100 was highly effective. ASD actually had a performance-based contract to do this work and get the TCE cleaned up, and they were able to achieve greater than 99.9% reduction. The source area accumulations of the DC isomers and VC were high, but decreased rapidly, and complete reduction is expected based on favorable groundwater chemistry and abundance of bacteria that degrade cis and vinyl chloride, cis-1,2-DC and vinyl chloride. And then this collateral sequestration results promise favorable results for VOCs, PFAS, and 1,4-dioxane. One thing that we haven't talked about is, how long will this last? What will happen when the chlorinated ethenes are reduced? Will that granular activated carbon now be available for PFAS and 1,4-dioxane? think AST put out a piece not too long ago that showed that that's not likely to happen. There are other targets, that is, other chemicals naturally occurring at the site also that would be absorbed onto granular activated carbon. So we couldn't necessarily assume that PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, but it's still early in the project, a lot to learn. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Dwayne. Excellent, excellent presentation. We've got about 20 minutes or so for questions. There is one question, if you could re-show the groundwater parameters, and the question submitter said it's about slide 10. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and try and spin back to that. Sorry, I know it's a lot of it's a lot of bullets and animation to go back to. Hopefully you know the slide that he's referring to.
This one?
I would believe so, based on,
Okay.
Yeah, he's asking for the groundwater parameters for baseline. So we can just maybe just keep that up for a minute, and we
Sure.
can go ahead and kind of spin through some of these other questions. Someone asked about the rough order magnitude costs for implementing a project of this magnitude.
I'll answer that, and I'm glad that got asked. The cost of the project was $3 million. The overall remedial design characterization component was approximately $110,000. I always indicate that, the design characterization on most of these sites run somewhere between 5 and 10% of the overall remedial cost. And I always say, if you haven't spent that much money on the design characterization phase, then you really probably don't have a good handle of where the contaminant mass and how much resides there. So that's predominantly I would say, Mike, wouldn't you, on average, of what our, the design characterization in relation to the overall remedial cost runs is about 5 to 10%.
That's about right. Yeah, and there was actually another question about just how long the RDC took. Do you have I mean, and those.
Yeah. We started in December of 2023. We were there 2.5 weeks before Christmas, and then we came back and finished the last part of it. So I'm going to say overall for 4 weeks in the field.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Ray, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how important it was that all of that characterization was done. I think very few of us get an opportunity to see that much data collected at that close an interval over such a large area. We were very fortunate that the facility was under, construction, combination of demolition and construction. They even took out the second floor and a portion of the building to allow access to one of the sonic rigs. So I think it was critical to the success to know where to put the amendments, so we're not wasting amendment by injecting into intervals that aren't impacted, and to make sure that we're injecting into intervals that are. I loved it that our client approved doing this extensive characterization work in advance, and 100% supported it.
Someone asked a question about trans DCE and if that was monitored.
Yes, the trans DCE is included in the chlorine number calculations that you saw. So yes, the trans was a minor component. We have one well at the site where trans is higher than other locations. It also has chlorinated ethenes. at that well. Those are ppb level chlorinated ethanes, really low concentrations, but there's some very low DCA at, I think, 2 or 3 wells at the site. And again, it's not really the focus of this work, but it was interesting that the trans showed up at the well that had the chlorinated ethane in it.
Dwayne, here's one for you. Was there any calculation of the contribution of sequestration versus dechlorination?
No, I mean, Ray touched on that. I mean, our focus of the design was addressing the chlorinated mass. I mean, and that remedial design characterization, like I said, it tells us how much total mass is there so that we can match the, in the case of the Cat 100, you've got 2 things in play: the iron, and the donor that we're adding also. But it was like I said, it's a collateral effect. It wasn't a calculation of isotherms related to the carbon going in the ground of how much PFAS is there. It was whatever results that we got based upon treatment of the VOCs, then that was acceptable for what that would be. And Ray, I think, did a good job addressing. We don't know what the ultimate final outcome is going to be, and once the chlorinateds have been treated, and whether you'll get some more absorption once you free up sites, or like Ray said, that you got competition from natural conditions that could affect what the ultimate amount of that material will be absorbed onto the carbon.
Yeah, and I would add to that the focus of, I think, any remedy is to do as much good as possible for the money that we've spent. And the Cat 100 was the only candidate that was capable of a 2-fer, a 3-fer, a 4-fer. In other words, it was able to do more than one thing. It was able to completely reduce chlorinated ethenes. Other technologies are capable of doing that, but we also significantly decrease immediately the concentration of PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, decrease mass flux across the property boundary onto adjacent properties. And I've had some conversations with some friends at EPA who appreciate the effort of applying a technology for more than one goal. The 1,4-dioxane, I should mention, is anticipated to be one of the extra benefits in the longer term as conditions go from anaerobic to more aerobic. The 1,4-dioxane is expected to degrade easier. That is because there'll be favorable conditions for the bacteria that would degrade 1,4-dioxane under more aerobic conditions.
Yeah, I guess the time frame that you mentioned there kind of ties in nicely with the next question. I guess, Dwayne, this is probably more for you, but for like the product longevity, based on this project still in kind of in the early stages of monitoring, but based on other projects, how long would you expect the material to be, the injectate to be active for?
Oh, I mean, Boss 100 alone, just by itself, I mean, we've got sites that, we've used Boss 100 for PRB applications, and, we've had monitoring for greater than 10 years. Cat 100 sites, the first deployment of the product in Evansville, Indiana, that site was monitored for 6 years. We were still seeing fermentation, byproducts, where we see the starches and the yeast extract, being, broken down by, generation of acetate and some of the other dissolved gases that you would see. So, I mean, that's the power of it, is that, that it's a slow release breakdown and fermentation of those long chain, carbohydrates, and they continue to just provide electron pump to the formation for that reductive process. And, these sites like what you're seeing here, I mean, if you have sites, we have significant mass in the soil, but we are also on those sites that I'm talking about that are 6 years or longer. I mean, we're addressing, concentrations in the soil of, upwards of, 500 to 1,000 part per million in the soil, saturated soil itself. At this site, the highest concentration we saw, was around 150 to 160 part per million. So that's the speed of the treatment is going to be that much faster, depending on how much that mass is, how much mass is tied up in the soil. So yeah, I mean, long term, I mean, it'll continue to treat until that mass is completely gone at this site. And it's just happening quickly because, we've got great contact, and that, back diffusion off of the saturated soils into the groundwater is happening quickly, and we're getting treatment that fast. Yeah.
So a couple questions about the geotap. So I guess one here is why you went with the higher flow rate down in that lower unit, and also how long it takes to once you set that bentonite before you can come down and inject.
We like to at least at a minimum of 1 day, but I like to let it set for longer than that, two to three, to let it, fully hydrate. The why do we use that flow rate? And a lot of that's sort of like bedrock. That unit is that permeable, that broken up material of that Passaic Formation. In this case, we call it that, and Passaic Gap. And it's very permeable. So what we want in order to get distribution radially and, throughout the matrix, we want to, put pressure on the formation, like induced pressure. Like on a bedrock site, we like to try to inject on a fracture at a minimum around 300, 400 PSI, because we don't want to just follow preferential pathways. We're trying to push into micro fractures and all kinds of things. So at this site in that weathered unit, we use that bigger pump because we can vary the flow rate based on the signature that we're seeing the pressure gauge. And like I said, same thing, we're targeting a pressure to make sure that we're getting good distribution. So in this, we ran the pump up as, 110, gallon per minute, so that we saw the signature on the pressure gauge that we wanted to see, that, in order to make sure that we're getting, the product not only laterally, but, throughout that unit. And again, we're injecting every 2 vertical feet as we push down through that. And, we saw connection, 25, 50 feet away hydraulically with, adjacent, monitoring wells. And so we knew we were getting the product where it needed to go.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that have been submitted. I'll give another 30 seconds here while we sort of wrap up if anything else comes to mind. I'll also follow up with everyone here that has attended with the contact information for the speakers. If you'd like to reach out to them directly, as I mentioned, this is being recorded and will be posted to our website. Should be by the end of the week. And someone did raise their hand during the Q&A session. Unfortunately, I can't unmute you. If you do want to submit your question in the Q&A box, more than happy to answer that, or you can follow up with me or one of the speakers directly. Well, I don't see anything else. Ray, thank you so much for presenting this today, and Dwayne, thank you for co-presenting, and thank you to everyone that attended, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.